Hello guys and welcome back. Today I'm going to be making my post-trade deadline 2023 final predictions for the standings as well as my Stanley Cup winner for the 2023 playoffs. But how do I see every team in the playoff race doing down this stretch? Where do I see each team placing? Who gets into the wild cards? And who will win the Stanley Cup in 2023? Watch till the end for every single pick and all of the predictions. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this. Now let's get started early here with one of the wackiest divisions in the league in the Central Division. And we're going to go through the entire Western playoff race and to see which teams will finish where and who they'll face in the first round. But with this Central Division, it's kind of all over the place because right now you have Dallas in first place with 81 points in 64 games, Minnesota quickly behind them with 78 in 63 games, and Winnipeg with 65 points in 64 games. But to me, I think we'll see a ton of changes. And I think, honestly, if there's any division that we'll see a lot of changes in, it's this between now and the finish line in the 2023 playoff race. Now, when we look at that first place position, right now Dallas has that. As a Stars fan, I am completely not confident at all in that position being kept. And you know what? I'm going to say the Minnesota Wild are the team to end up getting this spot. And I think they're going to finish with 100 points on the season. Right now, they have 36 wins, 21 regulation losses, 6 overtime losses. But right now, they're 8-1-1 in their last 10. They have a pretty easy schedule, all things considered, and have won 4 straight games. I think they're going to overtake that lead and get number 1. Next up, let's go into number 2 in the Central. And you might think that I put a team like Dallas or the Winnipeg Jets in this spot. No, I'm going to go with the Colorado Avalanche. I think they get number 2, and I think they'll end up getting 99 points on the year. And to me, with the Colorado Avalanche, they're in a unique position. They're second in the wild card spot, but right now they're 6-2-2 over their last 10. They got 34 regulation wins, 21 regulation losses, 6 overtime losses, 74 points on the season. But as guys start to get a little bit more healthy, hopefully down the stretch for Colorado, I think that'll definitely add to their playoff hopes. And when it comes to the actual strength of schedule, right now they have the easiest remaining schedule in the entire league. They only face Toronto once, Dallas once, LA a couple of times. Not really a ton of big, especially Eastern Conference teams. And I think that'll aid them in their second half hopes. Next up, let's go into number 3. And I think this is where the Dallas Stars end up finishing. In this spot, I think it'll be interesting. I think they'll end up getting 97 points on the year. And I don't think it'll be all too great down the stretch. I think they'll be pretty fine. Their schedule is pretty great among all NHL teams. But I feel like for Dallas, even though there's been a couple of solid additions for them, they're not going to be too hot, but they're also not going to be horrible where they get back into a playoff wildcard spot. But I think number 3 makes a lot of sense for them, honestly. But let's go on to the Pacific Division now. It's a division that I could also see a lot of changes happening in, all things considered. Right now, we have number 1, Vegas, then LA number 2, and then Seattle number 3. But I think there will be some changes here. At the very top of the division, I see the LA Kings getting the top spot with 100 points on the year. And to me, with LA, they're also in a pretty good position straight of schedule-wise. 27 out of 32 teams, which on the lower side you want to be, with Colorado being 32 out of 32. But with LA, they made some big additions with Gavrikov and Korpisalo at the deadline. I think that'll definitely aid their second half inspirations in these last few weeks of the season. And I think they'll do very, very well. Also, they're 7-2-1 in their last 10, a 4-game winning streak. I think that will continue throughout the rest. Now for number 2, I do think this is where the Vegas Golden Knights are going to end up. It's not going to be too bad for them. I see them going right behind LA. I can't spell Vegas right now. But right behind LA with 99 points. Just like LA, they've been extremely hot. They are 7-1-2 over their last 10, 3 straight wins. And their trade deadline acquisitions have also been huge, with Barbashev being fantastic for them. Jack Eichel has gotten hot recently, and that defense is starting to be a little bit better, even if the inconsistencies are there. But I do think second place for them is where they'll end up. Next up at number 3, though, I think this is where Seattle will finish. I see them getting 97 points. I could see the Oilers being right in that position, maybe being third by the end of things, but I think Seattle is just going to get it done. Right now, they're 36-21-6. They're 6-3-1 over their last 10 with a 4-game winning streak right now. And for Seattle, they're 29 out of 32 NHL teams in strength of schedule. Again, you want to be lower on that list. You don't want to be higher up. And Seattle is in a fantastic position still, especially if that goaltending is able to stay at least at a somewhat okay level. Next up, let's go on to the Western Conference wildcards, though. And this is where it gets really interesting because there's a couple of teams here that will really be in the hunt. But I think number one in the wildcard race will be Edmonton, and I see them finishing with the same amount of points as Seattle, but being in that wildcard spot with 97 points. And right now they're 5-3-2 over their last 10. Nothing too amazing, but I think the Ekholm addition is going to be huge for them, and I think we'll see them really start to gain some momentum in the last couple of weeks of the season, especially. But I do think for the Oilers, they'll do quite well, and will be still in a pretty decent position come playoff time. Next up, though, at number 2, I think this will be the Winnipeg Jets. I mean, the Winnipeg Jets would have to slump massively to be outside the playoffs at this rate. And there's a couple of teams that maybe could be in the race here, which we'll get into in a second. But unless Winnipeg loses almost every single game down the stretch, I think they'll be okay. Now, they're 2-6-2 over their last 10. Not really the most inspired hockey right now, but I think they'll be fine by the end of things, and I think by the end of things, they'll have 95 points on the year. Now, for the few teams that will just be outside of things, I got the Calgary Flames being right outside. I see them finishing with 92 points in the year. I see them getting a little bit hot, no pun intended, over these last couple of weeks. Now, they just got a big win as well versus the Dallas Stars, and we'll see if that momentum starts to carry over because they badly need it. But I think they'll be the one true Western Conference team that gives that whole Western Conference wild card race a run for its money and starts to make things interesting. At number 4, I got Nashville. They will maybe be in it a little bit. They've actually been a little bit interesting lately because you look over their last 10, they're 6-3-1. And even though they sold massively, I could still see them being in the race for a little bit here. And I think they'll finish with 88 points in the year. They got 69 points in 61 games. But I think over this stretch, they'll do quite solidly and be in it at least a little bit. All right, let's get started with the Eastern Conference, which, especially when it comes to the wild card race, will be one of the most interesting stories in the NHL over these next few weeks and towards the end of the season, because it is going to be a bloodbath through and through. But let's start off with the divisions here, and let's start out with the Metro Division, which I think, especially at the very top, there's going to be a really interesting battle here between Carolina and New Jersey. There's very little that separates them right now. With Carolina, they're 7-3-10 over their or 7-3-0 over their last 10. With New Jersey being 7-2-1 over the last 10. Right now, they're only 2 points separated from each other. 90 points of Carolina, 88 points New Jersey, even if the Devils have one more games played. But they're both extremely hot right now. They bought, and especially in New Jersey's case, they made some big trade acquisitions in Timo Meier especially. So it'll be a really interesting race towards the very end. But I do think we'll see Carolina eventually win it just barely. And I think they'll get 119 points on the season, being one of the best teams in the league. And if it weren't for the Boston Bruins being the President's Trophy winners, which leaves New Jersey getting that second place spot. But I also think they're going to be extremely close too, 108 points. I see it going right down to the very wire. There maybe to the last game of the season, it being decided for that big number 1 seed. But I think Carolina will just barely edge over. But I don't think New Jersey is still going to be exceptional over these next few weeks. 118 points is nothing to scoff at all. And would most years be a President's Trophy team, which is crazy to think about. At number 3, though, I'm going to go with the New York Rangers. And to me, they're in an interesting spot right now. I don't think they're going to be dominant over the next stretch. I see them right now getting 99 points and finishing with that mark. They're 4-5-1 over their last 10. They've lost 2 straight, adding on Patrick Kane and all these different guys. To me, with the Rangers, it might have some growing pains, and I don't think they're going to be great down the stretch, but I think they'll be good enough to still get that 3rd spot and still kind of fend off the New York Islanders potentially, or some of the other Metro teams in the wildcard race from getting that spot. Next up is the Atlantic, though, and right now we got Boston number 1. That is likely not going to change, and it won't really. If we're being honest, it's not going to change. Nothing's going to change with that. They're going to make it happen, all right? It's going to happen. The question is, how many records will they break? How far will they get? And I think they'll finish with 130 points in the season. Right now, they're on pace for 136, I believe, so just under that. But I do think with the Bruins, they'll still be unbelievable. I mean, what they've had so far, they're on a 10-game winning streak, and nobody is talking about it. That is how good this Bruins team is, and I think they'll have no problems for winning the President's Trophy and getting that done in the end. Next up, though, let's go to the rest of the Atlantic, which is an interesting spot, kind of slumping a little bit between Toronto and Tampa. But I do think Toronto will still get this spot. I think they'll finish with 102 points. They've been kind of iffy over the last 10 a little bit. And you, of course, have Ryan O'Reilly with a broken finger over the next 4 weeks, which will definitely put a damper on things for sure. But I still think they'll be good and hopefully healthy for the playoffs, which is all that matters if you're Toronto. Next up at number 3, though, we'll have who they face in Tampa Bay. And even though they've been slumping a ton, they're 2-5-3 over their last 10. And of course, there was the whole thing over their first line being benched in that 3rd period versus Buffalo. I still think they'll be all right. I still think things will work out for them, and I think they'll still be in that third spot. I see them getting 97 points on the year, and I think in the last couple weeks, putting it back together and being in a better spot for the playoffs. Next up, though, let's go on to the Eastern wildcard race. And this is all that really matters here. This is what we've been talking about. This has been what we've been wanting to see. The final race, the final finish for these teams, this is what's going to be the craziest, because there's right now 5, maybe even 6 teams out there that could have a chance at the playoff spot. The Capitals are obviously on the outside, but hey, who knows if they catch on fire? It could be anybody's game right now. But there's so many teams right now around that 68, 72 point range that really anything could happen. And you could have all these teams potentially in a playoff spot or not. You could have all these teams in different seeding, and I could see why you would. But going on to the number 1 spot in the Eastern wildcard race, I have the Pittsburgh Penguins getting that spot. And with their points pace, I see them getting 95 points. And with Pittsburgh, they're pretty middle of the road, if not a little bit on the more solid side in terms of strength of schedule, which I think will aid them quite a bit. But they've done okay over the last 10, 5-5-0, but they've gotten hot recently over these last couple of weeks. And I think for the Penguins, even though I think a lot of the trade deadline acquisitions were a little bit weird, they added a lot of depth that I think that will really aid them over these next few weeks especially. But for the Penguins, it's going to be a tough race. I could easily see them maybe even being outside the playoff race if more slumps continue out of them. But at number 2 in the wildcard race, I'm going to go with the New York Islanders. And they're in a pretty solid spot, I would say. They're 5-2-3 over their last 10. They've gotten a lot of points over the last 10. And they got a 32-25-8 record on them, 72 points in 65 games. The only thing that I think could kind of hold them back a little bit is the inconsistencies. They have a pretty good strength of schedule, 21 out of 32 NHL teams, so they got that going for them. But I do think for the Islanders, they'll just barely be in the race. But I think players like Bo Horvat will especially aid them. And if Matthew Barzal is able to come back soon, then I think that will be necessary. I think that will be what happens here. It seems like he's close to coming back, and that will be huge for the Islanders if that is the case. Next up at number 3, though, in the wildcard race, I'm going to go with the Ottawa Senators here. They've been so hot as of late, and even though they had a humongous, devastating loss for Chicago, which I think might, in the end, put them outside of the playoffs, I still think they'll be right there in the race, 93 points, right to the very end. And to me, if I'm Ottawa, I'm still very proud of that, especially with how badly they started the season. At number 4, next up, I'm going to go with the Sabres, who are also, I think, going to be right in it. And strength of schedule-wise, they're pretty interesting right now, but they also have one of the more hard schedules. They're 6 out of 32, so especially in the Eastern Conference, they have one of the hardest schedules in the league, just like the Ottawa Senators. But to me, I think that could be what puts them out of things. And they also don't have a huge amount of games on the road, which is where they've been truly dominant. Right now, they are 19-9-2 on the road, which has really helped them, but they're not really one way or the other too much down the stretch, which I think could kind of bring some more unforgiving losses their way. But next, I'm going to go to number 5, and next up, right behind them, I have the Florida Panthers with 90 points. I just don't think it's going to be enough for them, and their inconsistencies and the injuries and everything they've had to deal with. They've been finally fully healthy and have finally gotten close to full health, and that, if there's going to be any reason why the Panthers make the playoffs this year, it's going to be because of that full health. But I think that might still, there might just be too many losses and too much inconsistencies for them to truly scrape their way back. But we'll see. Again, it is anyone's game, and if that goaltending is able to stay a little bit inconsistent, then I think the Panthers could definitely have a good chance. And then at number 6, I have the Capitals finishing in that last spot with 82 points and being in the race a little bit right now, but also with how much they've sold, kind of going out of the race as it winds down. And seeing the Capitals not make the playoffs would be extraordinarily weird, but I think that's just the reality that's going to have to set in. Let's talk about who wins these first round matchups in the West. First, we got Minnesota versus Winnipeg, which would be a really interesting matchup. And I actually think it would be closer than some people expect. I mean, Rick Bowness hockey in the playoffs usually keeps things close, especially with Connor Hellebuyck and just how brilliant he is as a goaltender. You can never really underestimate Winnipeg, especially with Hellebuck's ability and his size and the way he's able to command a series and command games. But I do think in the end, this will be a 7-game series. But I actually do think the Minnesota Wild will end up winning this in 7, just barely. And I think this could also see an overtime in Game 7, just like the Calgary-Dallas series last time. But I think a lot of it depends on goaltending, and I think for Minnesota, Gustafsson will come up huge in the big moments. Next up is Colorado versus Dallas, and if you know me as a Stars fan, I mean, I feel like first half-wise, this Dallas team could have absolutely beat Colorado, but this second half, even though a lot of their losses have come in overtime, they just don't really feel like they have that clutch gene right now. And the way they're giving up goals, the way they're giving up opportunities, I think is just not going to translate, especially versus a high-octane team like Colorado in a potential 7-game series. And I think Colorado will win in 7. Or win in 6, actually, because I feel like for the Stars, they'll have a couple of games there and they'll stay competitive, but I just don't think for the Avs, especially once they get fully healthy, it will be quite enough. LA versus Edmonton is going to be wild because I feel like for LA, they could go pretty far in this year's playoffs, but I feel like Edmonton is also just a little bit of an Achilles heel for them. You saw in last year's playoff series how it was just Connor McDavid through and through. But this year for Edmonton, I think, again, all kind of depends on that goaltending. With Stuart Skinner likely being the guy right now, we'll see if that continues. But you also have Matthias Ekholm out of that defense, which will make things a lot more sturdy on the back end for them. And Connor McDavid is playing even better than he did last season, so we'll see if that translates onto the playoffs. But LA is also a lot more complete with Gavrikov and Korpisalo on that defense and goaltending. Their forward group is highly fascinating, and of course you got Kevin Fiala onto that forward group too. And to me, for LA, I think it'll be another 7-game series. I think it'll be another one that goes right to the very end. But I kind of see it going the same way, where Connor McDavid overpowers them and Edmonton wins in 7 games. And I'd love to be wrong, because I think LA going far will be really fun to see. And I think LA, if they do beat Edmonton, has a chance to go pretty far too. But I feel like Edmonton and Connor McDavid's just pure skill level and already proving in the playoffs, I think that'll carry over onto this year. Next up is Vegas versus Seattle. This is one that I kind of go back and forth on, because I think both of these teams aren't really amazingly built for the playoffs. And I think especially in Seattle's case, they could be a big boomer bust team. But I do think Vegas will end up winning this in 5 games, even though I do think Vegas could also be a little bit boomer bust. I feel like their forward group is going to come up in a big way. Jack Eichel's going to have a huge series. And I think for both defenses and goaltending, I feel like the goaltending for the Golden Knights might be what makes the difference, especially in that 5-game series where I think those stops are going to be huge, with Seattle not really getting the best goaltending in the world. All right, next up we got the Eastern Conference matchups. Let's start off the Boston Bruins versus the New York Islanders. This one would be pretty burly, and obviously the Islanders, they're more built for that playoff style game, so I don't think you should count them out completely in this. But I'm still going to pick the Bruins in 6 games. They're going to move on to the first round. It's going to happen. I just think the concern is maybe after that, but they're completely built for the playoffs, just like the Islanders are, but in such a bigger way. And I think there might be maybe some worries for maybe that defense a little bit, but I don't think so, really. I mean, there's so few weaknesses on the team, if any, and I don't think the Islanders are going to be the team that really exposes that. Unless Ilya Sorokin is the god that is on Earth, which for most of this season he has been. I think that's really the only thing keeping the Bruins back from a first-round win. Next up is Toronto versus Tampa Bay, and to me, this all depends on the health of the Leafs. If Matt Murray isn't back and he's not playing well, if Ryan O'Reilly isn't back and he's not playing well, then I think for Tampa Bay, they have a pretty big advantage. But I think if they do stay healthy, which I think is what will happen, I think the Toronto Maple Leafs will actually win this series in 6. To me, when it comes to Tampa Bay, they've seemed very inconsistent this year, and that defense has been just pretty atrocious all season. And to me, especially with now the inconsistencies in the locker room, especially with that first line and the turmoil that we've seen over the past few weeks, even though they definitely could be fine, I think if Toronto's going to win, it's going to be this year. And I think that health and the additions they made in the back end especially will help drastically. But really, it could, again, all come back down to goaltending. And if Vasilevsky's way better than a Matt Murray or Samsonov, then that could definitely be the difference. But I think we'll see maybe Samsonov start potentially, and I think he'll be huge in the series. Next up is Carolina versus Pittsburgh. And this one, I kind of go back and forth on. I do feel like for Pittsburgh, though, they just don't have enough right now to, especially compared to prior years where they've lost back to back or whatever it is in the first round, to have much, especially against a team like Carolina. I see the Carolina Hurricanes winning this series in 6, but I do see the Penguins still keeping in on it. But again, I think that defense and that goaltending will be huge issues, and especially that depth in the bottom 6, just I don't think will be there consistently. Next up is New Jersey versus the New York Rangers, and this one is going to be wild, folks. This one is going to be maybe my favorite playoff series of the entire first round, because there's so much to talk about here. There's so many different factors. The trade deadline moves that both teams made, with the Devils adding Meyer, the Rangers adding Tarasenko and Kane and all these different guys, and also the teams at hand here. With New York, I would say they're a little bit more physical, which gives them an edge there. As for the Devils, though, they're just way more complete in terms of just a full team unit, in terms of possession and really just giving you all they have relentlessly, especially with that defense being so much better than what we've seen in years past, with Dougie Hamilton being at a great level, a top 5 Norris level in my opinion, with Siegenthaler and John Marino being excellent defensemen, and Vitek Vanacek being one of the better goalies in the league this year, especially over these last few weeks. And to me with New Jersey, I think they just have the slight edge in this series, especially for the Rangers if that chemistry isn't able to be complete. Their power play looks like a mess right now. Patrick Kane looks like he doesn't fit whatsoever. And I think even if he does, there might be issues there defensively that I think are going to creep up throughout the playoffs. The only thing that could change that, I think, is Igor Shesterkin. Do we see the full Igor Shesterkin in the playoff series? That's going to be the main difference. If we do, the Rangers win. If we don't, I think the Devils are absolutely going to cream New York. And I feel like we might see a bit of both, which leads me to believe that New Jersey will win this series in 7. I think it'll be an absolutely amazing one and the best one of the first round. But I have a feeling, I just have a slight feeling with this Rangers team that playoff completeness might not be there, especially with the forward group. And I'm talking about on defense, because on paper they have a ton of fantastic options, but I feel like that defensive game just might fail them at certain points. Let's skip ahead a bit here to the conference finals. We start with the Western Conference final, and to me, I think it'll be Colorado versus Edmonton, just like last year. But I do think this year's playoff matchup will be way closer, and I mean way closer, especially with the additions of Matthias Ekholm out of that defense, which again are so necessary, especially come playoff time. And I do think Stuart Skinner will be better than what the Oilers had in last year's playoffs if he stays consistent and healthy, of course. But I do think the Avalanche still win that series in 7 if they're completely fully healthy and everything, even though I think the depth compared to last year is a little bit worse, especially compared to the trade deadline acquisitions they made last year. I still think they'll get it done and head on to the Stanley Cup Finals for the 2nd year in a row. As for the Eastern Conference Finals, I see it being Boston versus New Jersey. I see the New Jersey Devils just getting the edge in that Kane series. And I think the Bruins will win that series in 6, though I do think the Devils, especially with the forward group, will put up a fight, and a pretty good one too. Though I just feel like there might be some inconsistencies compared to Boston that are just, as you're getting pounded by Boston, line after line, are just going to weed away a little bit and start to wither away. And I think New Jersey will start to kind of pull back a little bit, and the Bruins will pull ahead throughout the last couple of games of that series, which brings us on to the big one, Boston versus Colorado Stanley Cup Final. And to me, I go back and forth on this. If Colorado's fully healthy, I could see them putting up a fight. But I just look at this Bruins team, and the only real weakness I saw was depth, and then they fixed that both in the forward group and the defense at the trade deadline. And you have one of the best goalies in the world right now, playing as one of the best goalies in the world right now in Linus Ullmark. And you have the depth right now that you can have injuries, even in the goaltending position. Jeremy Swayman can still put up a fight when he really needs to. And I think for the Bruins, they're just going to be relentless, and they're just going to have such a great balanced attack of great players who can score offensively, rugged players who can beat you in, especially on that defense. And to me, I think the Bruins have one of the best defenses in the entire league right now, probably the best. They have one of the best systems in the league right now, some of the best goaltending, some of the best forward group, some of the best top-end scoring. And I think for that, they will transition it onto the playoffs, and I think Boston will win this series in 6 games. And that's my playoff predictions and Stanley Cup winner for right now. This could end up changing by the time the season is done and everything, and I likely will do an update of this when the season is completely done so we can get into the bracket and everything. But those are my predictions for the 2023 season. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys agree and disagree with. Who do you guys see winning the Stanley Cup? Who do you guys see making the playoffs this year? And where do you see your team ending up? Let us know down below. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't already, and share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online. I'll see you in the next one, though, and click on this card for all my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day, y'all, and goodbye.